I'd like to invite our distinguished industrial collaborators to these chairs, and then will you be there as well? Okay, oh, you're Matthias Backman, very good. Okay, so I give you a microphone. Would you like to start? We have just mentioned a few things. You've heard about the activities that we are doing. So I'd just like to have your comments on, let's say, what's the importance of this area for you as an industry, and are we doing the right things here at Chalmers, or is there any additional need of research that you see? So who would like to start? Mikael.
Okay, you asked for it. I think the first thing is that we need to congratulate Chalmers for also having an excellent equipment park to be able to do basic research in so many different areas with scalable equipment that you have shown in these presentations, especially on the thermochemical side. But I think it's also very good combination that is shown. If you listen to all three in parallel and acknowledge the structure of the challenge together with the structure of the raw material that all three are talking about. And I find it very interesting to maintain as much of the chemical structure, including the oxygen, in the bio-based product. I know that there are a lot of need to do hydrocarbons, but what nature has built is also something that is quite interesting and difficult to break without causing then, be it even a bio-based CO2 emission. So I think on these aspects there is a lot of different details that I could combine, but let's agree upon the two extremely important things that Hans showed at the last page. But I would still like to add one aspect to the biomass discussion, and that is, furthermore, to have the best climate bang from the biomass, it is also to be considered as very local. Extensive transportation of low carbon biomass will start to consume the climate benefit quite soon.
Very good, thank you. Please, Lars.
Okay, if I am to continue here, first of all, I am also very impressed by Chalmers and the differentiation and versatility of their research, so congratulations to you. And we follow, of course, closely what happens here. And indeed, the transition from fossil to non-fossil is maybe the main issue of our time, and is Sweden the right place to develop this industry and make a business out of it? I think that's a question that is discussed at both this and many conferences. In my company, we do produce both fuels and chemicals from hydrocarbons and from renewables today, and we see the big challenges that are ahead in getting away from the very good research platform we have into reality. And I think the key we need to address is how can we make this work in larger scale rather than reinventing good research time after time. In my mind, we look for simple monomers in order to build existing chemicals. Maybe not the same view as you have altogether. We, as Perstorp, do use methane, carbon monoxide, ethylene, ethanol, simple molecules. And if we can reproduce them in an efficient way from forest or waste, I think that's the key in our industry, and I would like to discuss that in more detail as we go along here.
Very good. Thank you very much. Ove, you any additional comments?
Of course. First of all, I think what we have discussed so far is more or less the core of the biorefineries. I mean, the biorefinery or bioenergy could be, I mean, it's a huge system we're talking about here. So I think the core technologies we have mentioned so far is kind of thermochemical route, the biochemical route, but around that, I think there is so much really that we also need to address, and this cannot maybe be done here at Chalmers. For example, logistics. I mean, you both mentioned a huge amount of biomass that has to be transported around. Should that be? How should we deal with that kind of problem, or is it a possibility maybe for developing new types of biomass that is more transport efficient? I mean, you could discuss torrefaction and all that. But I think the key issue here is really, as I see it, is how to integrate these kind of novel technologies into the old world. How should this transition work? How should we integrate the new thinking, the new technologies, the new materials into the old world? Because, I mean, we're still operating refineries, we're operating petrochemical complexes, not very far from here, by the way. And that will not be torn down and just put as scrap somewhere. This has to be integrated. So I think that's something I want you to kind of consider. How will this technology transition be done? How should you integrate this? I mean, sometimes we talk about the new world and the old world and nothing in between. But this technology transition, to me, it's not very clear to see how this should be done. How should you gradually move to a renewable system and so on? Yeah, I think those were kind of the key. I think we will address a lot of other kind of system issues this afternoon, because if we talk about a transition, you always have to adapt things like policies, taxes, legislation, standards, and so on, which we normally don't address in a forum like this, because here we're talking research, and that's just something that should be done. But I think how to really have an integrated view on the system, because even if we have the best, there are so many examples in the world of really lovely technologies that haven't come very far because of lack of policies and kind of lack of links to industry that could really promote them. That kind of this valley of death between demonstration and commercialization. And I think that's also something. I think you have very good opportunities here in Chalmers to do this. Just kind of make use of it.
Very good. Thank you very much. And final one is not THORE, but Mattias Backmark, right?
Yes. The good news is that Mattias Backmark will join us after lunch. But he has written here about these presentations very briefly. I will take a summary of that. And first of all, he is also impressed, at least as I interpret it. Yes, he is. He says, for Australia, it's a very interesting project with a good potential. The most important thing is the choice of end products in these systems. And also one aspect is the amount of non-process elements that are very important for a long-term production of these products. He is also into what Ove mentioned, but he talks about the value chains. which is a little of the same way. High margin and low volumes, or vice versa, for example. That is very important also. And also that the investment cost and operational cost must compete with alternative technologies, and that must be looked into, of course. And he mentioned different types of pyrolysis processes, which are relatively cheap in the first stage, at least. For Lisbeth, he says, these aspects are very important in the concepts that Hans presented, very important parts of that. Prim is very interested in alternative organisms who can ferment direct to hydrocarbons, alternatively to fatty acids or oil. That, Lisbeth, is something to work on, I think. And the fermentation process with an organism which produces something which is not, what to say, self-toxic? No, what? Lisbeth, self-toxic, or what? Which is not self-toxic. It's interesting. For Henrik Thunman, he says, this is along the lines that Prim also have thoughts about, to use existing infrastructure for the production of green molecules. And here are very interesting ideas. And it's very important not to snöa in sig, he has written it in Swedish, just to have a drop-in fuel or already product. A distributed, centralized, combined distributed, centralized systems should be very interesting.
Very good, thank you. Maybe our distinguished chair, could I use this one? Maybe anyone would like to have a comment on anything?
I've come back to this on the logistics, because it is, of course, one of the big issues. And as I see it, if you're going for the scales that we talk about here, 200 to 300 megawatt units, you need to move this to ships. And you have to integrate drying and fuel handling to the ship. Because if you look on the fuel yards and the cost for these areas, it's actually cheaper to build ships and put the dryer system onto them. And then you actually integrate the transportation from the whole Nordic hemisphere into Sweden with a decent energy consumption.
Lisbeth?
I wanted to comment a little bit on, there was someone saying that when we have to define which product to produce, should it be a high volume, low value, or a high value, low volume? I think in the concept of biorefinery, it needs to be a combination of these, because if we're going to bring value of all the components, we need to combine these different aspects. And here I think we need a discussion between academia and industry, how this can be done, and putting it out to value for the industry, of course. So this is something I would like to hear your views on.
So anyone like to, Lars?
Yeah, maybe I can make a few comments. First, I agree very much with you, Lisbeth, that I think you need to combine the bulk production with specialities, and that you can sort of have a base load and also sort of icing on the cake with higher value added molecules, and they will together combine the profitability of a sort of bio-based chemical extraction system. On logistics and transportation, I think there is also at Chalmers a lot of system integration work, and maybe we'll come into that later. That is very good indeed. And I think the example of the power industry is moving a lot of biomass long distance, and it might be so that using existing refineries or chemical clusters is as efficient as using the bio-based material where it sort of is growing. So I think that must also be included in an integrated systems analysis before you can make up your mind. there's also the issue of heat usage and heat integration. You cannot have a large unit in the middle of a forest where you cannot use excess low value energy, but you may have that closer to populated areas.
Mikael?
Yep. Have you heard about some industry that actually turns biomass into materials today? It happens to be quite a large usage of solid wood and wooden fibers used in a lot of different applications. And this is based on a market mechanism, a wood or biomass price that is set between the buyer and seller. And this is a system use. Different fractions are going to different uses. And it's kind of an extremely old-fashioned way of optimize it. Find the right use for each part of the tree, including the energy fraction that is going to the fossil-free heating sector in Sweden today. And I think there is something to take into account along this as well. There is potentials to be added to this existing system, including the heat integrations, etc. But we for sure come back to that in the afternoon with the system discussions. But that's based on actual experience that you face certain limitations in cost competitiveness of volumes to different points. When you are in this market situation that there is a supply and there is a demand and you have to pay in competition. And there is actually a surprisingly high material efficiency out of the forest material. If you calculate the wooden products, the building materials, the interior products that you see here included, if you count the fiber products, including hygiene and other materials that we use every day, I think you come to around 75% yield, including the flow that goes directly to the heating plants. And then the remaining 25 is used to convert this in the industry, and a part of that is also exported. So I think going from this utilization, the next steps in the biorefineries, and that's where the interesting and thrilling parts are, to make this more material and more energy efficient next generation things. And I fully agree, it must be a variety of products. It is not one product, it is not one hydrocarbon that will be the future.
Very good. Anyone else like to comment?
No, I just wanted to stress the kind of the hybrid solutions here. That I'm a strong believer of slow changes. So I think that's something sometimes that I'm missing in this research is that's very much focused on pure biomass, pure processes based on biomass. But I think the future is not that simple. So I think there should be more focus on kind of this kind of transition processes, hybrid processes using both existing refinery processes, if you call them that, and the bio processes in kind of parallel. How these should be integrated to kind of achieve a smooth transformation.
Thank you. Tore or Matthias? Or?
No, it's Tore. I will not give my own views because we will discuss that in the afternoon. I have one information for the speakers and for you and for everyone, which we should have said from the beginning. We are filming this. And okay. so it will be put on the internet. I had in mind to say it afterwards, but I say it now.
integrity. Okay, according to the agenda, we're going over to the audience possibilities to put some questions. Maybe I can borrow some of these. Okay, take one. Anyone have a question? Everything is crystal clear?
My name is Avi Youngblom. I'm interested in all your aspects here. I'm an entrepreneur and business angel. So I was thinking of you, Mr. Eon, so to say, that you're talking about this transformation from the old world to the new world and the process around this. Do you see any need for some regulation or economic incentives to get this to go speed up?
Of course, everything is driven by policies and regulations and taxes and so on. I think that's and I think everybody agrees on that there need to be kind of long-term rules on how this should be done. I mean, we have or many of us have experienced the changes when we try to phase out oil in the 80s and the 90s and so on, and then gradually we dropped back into some kind of oil dependence. So I think that there has to be kind of long-term rules and regulations and legislations and standard. That has to be done in parallel with the science, and there has to be communication, of course. So of course, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Lars?
Can I make a comment on that? I think it's very important to understand and realize that the current schemes to support fuel and energy is sometimes putting problems on using the same biomass for chemical and materials, since there are huge taxes on the one side that you help one business. At the same time, there is no such thing as in the materials industry. And I think this is making the discussion more difficult, since the molecules converge to be basically the same if you are looking into a fuel world or into a chemical world. Just take the simple example of natural gas and biogas, which is both methane, and one is worth four times as much as the other today, and which to use may vary much with the paying power of application. And if there's a legislation on one and none on the other, we do face a problem.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Bo Norman from the Innovation Office here at Chalmers. You talk a lot about sort of the long-term transition and slow transition. But if we listen to some of the climate scientists, they say we need to downscale our emissions like 10% per annum from now and onwards. So where do you see the possibility for the most rapid scaling of these different processes? What can be done like in 2 years and 5 years? Where do you see the potential for this very rapid transition?
That's the million-dollar question. Anyone? The easy one? Anyone to want to comment on that? Well.
I can't pinpoint 1 or 2 or 3, because with such a radical approach, and remember it should continue year after year, it has to be a lot of attention to what is the most fossil intense things. And I'm quite convinced that one way of attacking such a huge thing is to really, really scrutinize the use of cement, concrete, because that is such a big part in this. So without touching that elephant in the room, it will not be possible to have such a rapid change. And then we come to the whole material substitution, and also turning a global problem like the CO2 emission into a local engagement. I think that is the only thing that give the man-to-man, women-to-women attention to the problem and really start to change the behavioral part. I overheard a discussion at the bus yesterday when I went from the office back home, and it was a lady that asked, but what about your climate consciousness if you are making that selection? I think more of that need to be a day-to-day, person-to-person discussion to really achieve such things.
Very good. You want to comment to that?
Well, I think you raised a very, very difficult question. How can we decrease our carbon footprint? I think beside what we do here, talk about fossil to non-fossil, I think there must be an efficiency strive in the world, which I think we do see a lot in the automotive industry now, that electrification of cars and better engines do take down rapidly. And that together with the substitution of fossil to non-fossil will help if it goes quickly enough. Then if we come into the issue of consumption and population growth on the globe, I think that is beyond the discussion here today, really.
Very good. Go to the next one. Karin, please.
Okay, thank you. Karin Andersson, Chalmers. All this is extremely interesting. I mean, this is about using good molecules for something, not only for cheap paper or firing, but also for chemicals. But I get a little worried when I see it was Henrik who showed that if we are going to use the energy in the biomass, it's not enough what we have in Sweden, and that's well known. So thinking a little longer, have you thought about the possibilities of introducing more energy into these systems, using the carbon dioxide, as Henrik indicated in some of his figures, and electricity, but adding to the biomass by adding electricity from wind, solar, whatever, making fuels, making chemicals, whatever. Are you working on that?
It was directed maybe to Hanne. You'd like to make a comment?
Yes, as I indicated, this is of course one of the integration possibilities. And if we go to the thermochemical route, that is not the problem. Electricity, because the thermochemical route you need heat for the conversion, and that you can use electricity. And if you want to use the carbon, all the carbon, you have to take away the hydrogen or the oxygen, and that you do with hydrogen, and then you produce water, and then you use the carbon atom, and you can do that very efficiently. So that already built into the processes.
I think also that if we think the bio-based society, at the same time, I think also we have to think about the electrified society. And we also, as Lars said, have to think about more efficient society here. So these things combined will go to the new type. And as we heard here also, that I think that for the biomaterial, we have to use that in the first step more and more for material purposes, actually. And why not use the sun and wind more for the energy purposes in the future in order to solve the problem? Because what we are discussing now is the problem that approximately 1 billion people have on Earth, but there are 6 billion other people that want to come up to our standard of living. And then we have a problem of supply all these people with material, actually.
Okay, Johanna, please.
So, Johanna Mossberg, and I have a question, because you represent different industry sectors, like the pulp and paper industry, the chemical industry, and the energy sector. And you're all talking about the biorefineries, and we are hoping in a bioeconomy for a strong and new, in a way, biorefinery industry. And that is something else. It's like a merge, or maybe it's a development of each of your sector, or a cross intersection. And Chalmers has shown that they can collaborate on different conversion processes, and we also heard that it's quite urgent that we make this transition. But from an industry perspective, could you see how we can maybe collaborate better between the different sectors to make this transition faster and smoother, and maybe also strengthen the Swedish industry base, building on what we already have in the traditional industry sectors towards like a successful biorefinery industry in Sweden?
Well, if I may start again, the word biorefinery, sometimes I think it is overused, and I think it was said that it is not easy to define it. In my world, I think it is a way forward to blend renewables into existing fossil structures and use the existing large-scale production system that is existing. The most easy way is to start to consume bio-based methane instead of natural gas in a chemical complex. That can be done tomorrow if the right systems were there. To produce olefins from ethanol or from methanol is also well-known technology that can be done tomorrow. It's done from coal in the world today. It could be done from gasified biomass very, very simply. So I'm very much in favor of green blending into existing infrastructures rather than creating new parallel worlds of chemical plants.
I think it's important to underline what Lars was saying earlier also. There seemed to be a quite powerful distinction between bio-based materials and the use of biomass to material applications. And then when it comes to using biomass to energy, then you immediately start to face incentive schemes. And Lars made the example of a fourfold price on biogas compared to natural gas, and that is linked to the transportation sector incentive volumes. And we need to understand what is actually the bigger scale effect of these before they are expanded to really start to make a sustainable damage to the whole system. This is a question of back to the chemical structure that was brought up by Hans and Lisbeth, and I can't avoid stressing the point that nature has put biomass together with an oxygen content of around 45% weight. And if we are basing the biorefineries and future bio-based products, taking that 45% weight into account, I think we will have a better resource efficiency overall than if we are basing the product selections on focusing only on hydrocarbons, where the discussion too often goes too fast, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think we also have to think maybe a bit. I totally agree with you that, I mean, there has to be a strong coordination between not only, I mean, we have 3, or should be 4 here, different representatives, and I think the world is not that simple that only 4 different branches could kind of make biorefineries happen. That's a kind of a societal issue also. But from my point of view, I think that there are a lot of factors that kind of pushing this. I mean, for example, now we have negative electricity prices in Europe sometimes because we have so much wind power. I worked 5 years in Germany. There we had negative prices on electricity, which of course results that you could produce very cheap hydrogen. And hydrogen could then be integrated like in LARS refinery. Instead of methane, we could kind of during certain periods use biorefineries as batteries, because there will be a huge storage demand in Europe in the future due to all the renewables coming into the system. So I think we have to think completely new. There will not be these kind of borders between paper refineries and so on in the future. We have to work much closer together, and also maybe there will be completely new players coming into this. Startups with new ideas, modular thinking and so on. And So I think this will be quite overwhelming, quite kind of revolutionary.
Okay, thank you very much. I realized that sort of combining these things together. I just the other day I read an article in Dagens Nyheter about a couple of industries, Saxo Nobel and others, saying that we have a representative from the Swedish Energy Agency here today. He's got a huge task to have a net no emission industry by 2045. And I wish him good luck to get to that point. But this article actually say that that's too weak. We can actually achieve it by 2040 already. And that's a lot of Fortum, Green Cargo, Stena, Siemens, Saxo Nobel. So it's is it possible? Is it relate to what Bo mentioned about the can we achieve it?
Can I ask that we can wait with that question? Because
Okay.
it's such an important question, and it deals also with the other combined, if you agree. And we come back to that in the general discussion also, combining all this technology we are discussing.
Okay, very good.
Well, is that okay?
That's okay with me, of course. I've got one other article that I read before this, which is quite interesting. I'm not going to because this is directly to biorefinery. Because what you have mentioned now, that the biorefineries is extremely complex. It's a lot of different stakeholders. It's a lot of different. So we need some sort of a systemic kind of approach of looking into this and sort of finalizing this. I mean, we're going to talk about the systemic approach later this day. More on the technology side, but we being the director for the energy area of advance, we also have a profile which is related to technology governance, which also relate to the non-technical issues related to this systemic approach. Do you see, could we combine these things in a better way in order to get closer to the big goal?
Simple answer is yes, it has to be combined. If we are not able to lift it to often enough to the holistic level and combine all the things to see the total effect, it will either nothing will happen, or it will be again build a system that has to be changed very rapidly to another direction.
Right. Any other comments before we...
Well, I can agree. It's a combination of many efforts, and I think we'll leave a further discussion until, as THORE says, until we have heard all the presentations here.
Very good. Okay, so it's time now to move to the next session, which is about carbon capture and storage issues. Thank you very much. Applause for the industry.